morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about a case that has had a significant judicial impact on the doctrine of separate legal entity. We will also be discussing the circumstances in which a court can actually lift or pierce the corporate structure to examine the realities behind the corporate facade. The case that we're talking about is Daimler Co. Limited versus Continental Tire and Rubber Co. Limited. This case is a landmark case on lifting the corporate veil. Before we move on to the case, we would discuss a quick introduction. So, the Daimler case is one of the most significant decisions regarding the doctrine of separate legal entity. This case addresses the circumstances in where a court may actually disregard the corporate structure and examine the true realities. This case was heard by the House of Lords in 1916 and it set a precedent in company law. The key issue that was actually raised is when can a court actually look beyond a company's legal entity. So the corporate veil or the separate legal entity essentially is a corporate veil provides a legal separation between a company and that of its members. This case had a foundational principle that was recognized in Salomon versus Salomon and Co. Limited. What this essentially means is that it shields the shareholders from any personal liability for corporate debts. However, courts may actually pierce this corporate veil in exceptional circumstances to reveal the true controllers of the company. This is something that we'll examine in the case going ahead. Before we actually delve into the case, we must understand the historical context. So during this period, quite famously, the World War I was going on. So World War I was a global conflict that was primarily fought between the Allied powers and the Central powers. So on August 4th of 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. So this war actually led to significant economic and trade restrictions. During the beginning of this war, an act called the Trading with Enemy Act was enacted by the House of Lords to prevent any British entity from conducting business with enemy nations. So in this example, it basically barred any British origin company to do any business with German origin companies. So many British companies during this period that had foreign ownership or control faced a lot of scrutiny over their operations. The Daimler case actually emerged in the backdrop, raising concerns about corporate nationality, ownership, and national security. Now we'll talk about the case preview, right? So during World War I, Continental Tire and Rubber Co. Limited was a British registered company. All the directors of this company and shareholders were German, except for one English secretary. So there were 25,000 shares in the company, out of which only one share was held by the English secretary, and the rest of the shares were all held by people of German origin. So yeah, that was a little bit about the ownership of the company. So Daimler Co. Limited actually stopped payments to Continental Tire and Rubber Co. Limited due to the concerns over the Trading with Enemy Act. They did not want to go past this act that was enacted during the beginning of the war, which is why they stopped any payments towards Continental Tire and Rubber Co. Limited. After Daimler Co. stopped any payments, Continental actually sued Daimler for all the outstanding payments that there were. Now let's talk about the key legal issues that were raised during this legal battle, to say the least. Could an English incorporated company that was controlled by enemy nationals still be treated as British? Should the courts actually lift the corporate veil to determine the company's true character? And the conflict between legal personality and national security concerns. So these issues were primarily raised during the course of this legal battle. So now let's talk about the court proceedings, right? So the lower court actually ruled in favor of Continental Tire and Rubber Co. Limited. It maintained that it was still a British company as it was incorporated in Britain. However, Lord Reading CJ stated that the incorporation status should not be disregarded. Post this, Daimler Co. actually appealed to the House of Lords, arguing that the company was effectively German as it was a German origin controlled power. So even though it was incorporated in Britain, the company was controlled of nationals from, of course, Germany. Right, so now let's talk about the House of Lords judgment. The House of Lords actually reversed the lower court's decision and they ruled that the Continental Tire was effectively an enemy compared It was essentially an enemy company due to the German control. So this proceeding actually established that the corporate veil can be lifted in cases of national security. It helps us distinguish between a company's legal status and the actual control of the company. Yeah, now let's talk about the impact that this case has had on corporate law. So this case, Daimler Co. Limited versus Continental Tire and Rubber Co. Limited, it reinforced that the corporate veil is not absolute. There are various circumstances in which this corporate veil can be lifted by courts, and these circumstances include fraud, taxation, or rather not paying tax, or any security concerns, as we have noticed in this case. So this landmark case actually influences modern regulations on corporate nationality and ownership transparency. This case applies in international business and compliance with sanction laws. So the conclusion for this case is that Daimler Co. Limited set a precedent for lifting the corporate veil in exceptional circumstances, as we have noticed. The courts may prioritize substance over form in legal matters, such as the control of Continental Tire was essentially German, but it was incorporated. So this sort of set a benchmark that the courts can prioritize substance over form. The case remains relevant in national security, taxation, and fraud even today. This was a landmark judgment that has shaped modern corporate law. So yeah, that was the Daimler Co. Limited versus Continental Tire.